CIA that has created the so-called Free Syrian Army is now committing acts of massacres and ethnic cleansing against the Syrian Kurds, Assyrians, Armenians, and other Christian communities in north and northeast of Syria. These terrorists, who once called moderate rebels by the Western mainstream media, is now called extremists, criminals, and thugs. But what has changed between 2011 till 2018 and now 2019? When these same terrorists were raping, beheading, slaughtering, burning alive, cooking severed heads of Syrian army soldiers and pro-government civilians, and posting them on the internet, no one in the civilized world blinked an eye. What has changed actually is two things. Number one, the main targeted group in northeast Syria by the Turkish-backed terrorists nowadays is the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, which is a rebranded Kurdish YPG.
The one that I think is most discussed and most misunderstood is the evolution with our counterpart in Syria, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, interestingly, they came about that name because at one point in time, and I dealt with them directly, I was in on the formative stage of the relationship with these guys. They formally called themselves the YPG, who the Turks would say equated to the PKK. You're dealing with a terrorist enemy of mine. How can you do that, ally? So we literally played back to them, hey, you got to change your brand. What do you want to call yourself besides the YPG? And with about a day's notice, they declared that they were the Syrian Democratic Forces. I thought it was a stroke of brilliance to put democracy in there somewhere. But it gave them a little bit of credibility.
And this group is a strong military asset for the West after Trump's decision to stop the covert CIA program to arm and train the so-called Free Syrian Army. Two, despite the continuous calls by the Syrian government to reconcile with the SDF and form a united military force against the Turkish invasion and its proxies, the SDF until this moment prefers to withdraw 30 kilometers away from the Turkish border in exchange to preserving the control of Syria's main oil and gas fields in the eastern shores of the Euphrates, which consist of over 50% of Syria's energy sources. Therefore, this diplomatic and military proposal to create the so-called safe zone in northern Syria is aimed at preventing the Syrian government to restore its authority over the borders and keep the oil fields in the hands of the SDF. Now, the West doesn't need the oil of Syria because the quantity is actually not huge, but they want to keep the oil away from the Syrian government to prevent it from investing these revenues of the oil in reconstruction.
The big thing for me is the oil fields. President Trump is thinking outside the box. I was so impressed with his thinking about the oil. Not only are we going to deny the oil fields falling into Iranian hands, I believe we're on the verge of a joint venture between us and the Syrian Democratic Forces who helped destroy ISIS and keep them destroyed to modernize the oil fields and make sure they get the revenue, not the Iranians, not Assad, and it can help pay for our small commitment in the future. And protecting Israel is the #1 objective. We can do all of that with a very small force.
Senator,
I'm increasingly optimistic this could turn out very well.
Now, in this regard, the German Defense Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer suggests sending troops to Syria to protect the population in the so-called safe zone. Now, isn't it better and more of a priority for her to secure Germany's borders first from the former Free Syrian Army, al-Nusra and ISIS fighters and their wives who infiltrated the ranks of the real refugees and are now living among us in Germany? And isn't it better option to promote for reconciliation and peace between the Syrian government and the Kurdish militias in order to stop this invasion of Turkey and its proxies and to restore peace and security into this area? Haven't we seen in the last years that in all the places that the Syrian government or the Syrian army entered is now enjoying the peace and security and trying to reconstruct itself? There is no problem between the Syrian government and the Syrian people and the Kurds. The Kurds are actually Syrian Kurds, just like I am Syrian Armenian. And under the constitution, we are all equal. And if the Kurdish community, they want certain cultural rights, this is a matter of discussion, and we can do that in the constitution discussion, the committee that was formed, and we can discuss this among ourselves. But it's not up to the German government or the German defense minister or the NATO or any other country to change the realities underground in Syria and to decide what is best for us as Syrians. Syrian Analysis is an independent news and analysis platform. Please don't hesitate to support the channel through Patreon, an online sponsorship platform that enables me to create more content to you. Link in the description below.